to the president that we shut the country down. First of all, I didn't recommend locking anything down.
I didn't recommend locking anything down. I didn't recommend locking anything down.
I didn't recommend locking anything down. I recommended to the president that we shut the country.
Broken Truth. We're back. Today I have the lovely and talented Clinton Ohlers with me, and it is wonderful to see you again, Clinton. How are you?
Well, it's great. Great to be here, John. How are you doing?
Living the dream, sir. Living the dream. Unfortunately, the dream is sometimes a nightmare when the news comes out that validates so much of the work we've been reporting on for the last couple of years.
Yeah.
This news is about Dr. Patrick Soon-Shiong, who did an interview with Tucker Carlson last week and pointed out, that there are risks of cancers now with children that he says are contributed to by the spike protein created by the vaccine and from COVID. You've had a chance to see it, it's pretty rough.
Well, it reminded me some of Dr. Sucharit Bhakti, a German doctor of Thai descent, who before, literally as the vaccines were being rolled out, and even before, I think based off of the Pfizer data and based off of what he knew of the physiology of how these vaccines would affect the body, he predicted all of this. All the things that we're hearing on that Tucker Carlson interview was predicted literally at the front of the rollout in terms of these turbo cancers. The idea that you've got cancer occurring in, a pancreatic cancer in this child as young as 10, or actually 13 was the case. And then in 10 or 11-year-olds, you're having colon cancer.
Right.
Right. And then, others are talking about this too, like Dr. William Marcus talking about they're seeing in 20-year-olds, the type of cancer that normally is reserved for people 70 years and older. So for the first time, they're seeing it there. So this was an important interview. But what I want to impress is this is not a surprise, right?
No.
To people who understood how the vaccine would work physiologically, this was the inevitable consequence. And it does, to me, it leads to a lot of questions about how this even came out of the market in the first place. And if Dr. Sucharit Bhakti knew, how did everybody involved not know? Right.
And I also want to point out that Dr. Soon-Shiong is also the owner of the LA Times. So it's an interesting little data point. But how about we roll a few minutes of it? This is about a 5-minute clip, collection of clips from the interview with Tucker.
Great.
I think it's really powerful, and let's get going on it.
Let's do it.
Really worrisome to me now is not just the rate, but the population in which it's increasing, i.e. the younger people. So we're clearly seeing an increase in certain types of cancer, like pancreatic cancer, ovarian cancer, and we're seeing it, colon cancer, and we're seeing it in younger people.
Just to set a baseline, what's the 10-year survival rate for pancreatic cancer?
It's horrible. I think, if you have pancreatic cancer today, I don't think there is a 10-year survival rate, so to speak.
Yes.
What there is, however, if you have patients who are what we call failed all standard of care, the survival rate is in months. You measure it in 2 months.
Yeah. That's certainly my understanding, having watched a lot of people die of it. So advanced pancreatic cancer is a death sentence. Where are you seeing it now?
Well, I got to tell you a really concerning story. It's not only am I seeing it now, I'm seeing it in younger people. And for the first time in my career, when I left UCLA, I was doing all the Whipples, which is a surgery to actually remove most of the pancreas, a very big operation.
You're a surgeon as well.
I'm a surgeon.
Yes.
And I was also doing pancreas transplants for type 2 diabetes and islet cell transplants and stem cell transplants. So I had this diverse activity as a UCLA assistant professor. But I never saw pancreatic cancer in children. And the greatest surprise to me was a 13-year-old with metastatic pancreatic cancer that the family called us to help. And to me, that was not only devastating, it emphasized the idea that we're seeing people with higher incidence of pancreatic cancer and younger. Right now in our clinic, we have 45-year-old, 50-year-old. And what was sad about this young boy, by the time he came to see us, he had exhausted all standards of care. And he came from Butler, Pennsylvania. And all the major medical centers really had exhausted all their therapy. And by the time he came to see us, his body was ridden and he passed away.
How many 13-year-old pancreatic cancer patients have you seen?
Never. I inquired around because it bothered me so much now of why this is happening. So Dr. Stephen Day, who was a good friend who was trained with me at UCLA when I was at UCLA, he's now at the Angeles Clinic, and I called him and he said, listen, Patrick, I'm now seeing an 8-year-old, a 10-year-old, an 11-year-old with colon cancer. Colon cancer. We've never seen that. We're seeing now 30-year-old, 40-year-old ladies, young ladies with ovarian cancer. So this is a real phenomenon of a rise of cancer in early people, in young people, and really need to get to the bottom of that. So
certain kinds of throat cancer are caused by viruses as well,
correct.
Right?
If you get HIV, you get Kaposi sarcoma.
Yes.
So we call that oncogenic viruses in medical terms, meaning viruses that are induced carcinogenic. And the fundamental basis for that are threefold. The hallmarks of an oncogenic virus is one, it must persist. And why? Because it continues to create inflammation. And why? With inflammation, you get suppression because your body's trying to suppress it. It must inhibit this thing called P53 that's in your body to try and protect your body from not having cancer. And if it persists and causes inflammation and inhibits P53, it begins to have the hallmarks of an oncogenic virus. So then the question is, does COVID, whether it come from the vaccine, which is the spike protein vaccine, or from the infection, which is spike-driven, that gets into every cell of our body because it goes through the
cell of the body?
It goes wherever you have this thing called the ACE2 receptor, which is in the blood vessels. So wherever you have a blood vessel in your body, it's where it's going to go. And if it has an ACE2 receptor on that blood vessel, that's where it can go because that's the purpose of the spike protein, to penetrate, to hijack that ACE2 receptor and get into their cells. So that's why it gets in the pancreas. That's why you have brain fog, because it disrupts the blood vessels of the brain and causes mitochondrial dysfunction. It's why in the colon, which is a high, and the GI tract is a high ACE2 receptor. That's why pancreas is a high ACE2 receptor, where that's why you people have in the heart, you have dysfunction. You've seen young people who have sudden heart attacks all of a sudden. You see young people with pancreatic cancer all of a sudden. You see young people with colon cancer all of a sudden. So is it by coincidence that post-COVID infection, post-COVID vaccine, we're seeing all these events where we know the spike protein goes there? I don't think so. I think it's not a coincidence. So the question is, can we prove, is this what I call long COVID virus persisting? And the group at University of California, San Francisco, has now definitively proven that and published that in papers like Nature.
That's the first part. What do you think of that?
Well, that's really concerning because for all of us who avoided the vaccine but did not manage to avoid COVID itself, it does make you wonder if there's longer term consequences for everyone. And it does make me, it makes me reflect back on the Chinese, right? The Chinese had these draconian lockdowns, and it really does make me question whether they knew something that we don't.
Right. It's well, there was so much espionage and dirty tricks going on throughout COVID against our own people, against this is just disappointing, at the least. We covered this in our NIH Gate work, and part of that was, the National Cancer Institute had evidence in 2021 that there was a spike protein concern with P53 induced cancers, and here he is saying all of this stuff that we reported, and for some reason the NIH and the NCI chose not to release 490 pages that would have probably implicated their awareness of the issue, because they were now, in 2021, they were suppressing studies that showed this link. Now here we have it again. And who wins? Who wins when they kick the can down the road like this?
I think it would be valuable to know, are these cases he's talking about, these 10 and 11 and 13-year-olds, were they also vaccinated? Because I would have to suspect that they were in fact vaccinated, because the quantity and the duration of the spike protein, if you've had vaccination, is so much more significant than if you have just had quote unquote natural infection, right? A misnomer, because it was never natural. It was man-made to start with. But if you caught the virus as opposed to catching the mRNA vaccine by way of a shot, right, you have a much lower and much less long, much shorter duration of spike protein in your system. So I would think that even if one of those examples was from virus originating spike protein, probably at least 3 of the other 4 would be from the vaccines. But that would be great information to have.
Yeah, this is obviously not the end of the story, but it is definitely an expected plot twist. Let's keep going. He's about to talk about how leadership betrayed us.
The opportunity to clear the virus was actually known, I think, by Collins and by Fauci, that it did not clear the virus.
The spike vaccines,
the spike vaccine,
the Pfizer, Moderna,
the antibody
mRNA,
vaccine does not, and to this day, does not clear the virus.
That seems like a big deal.
Well, just what we talked about. If you don't clear the virus, and you have pieces of the virus in there, especially spike, whether from the infection or from the vaccine, and now you get another infection. Now the virus brings along this nucleic capsid. Now it reconjoins and replicates again in these what they call privileged sites. 2 years later, so what we're seeing now, we're back to persistence. That's now published just months ago. And this is what I shared with NIH secretly 4 months ago. And persistence, asymptomatic persistence, but with inflammation and reduction of P53 and immunosuppression are all the hallmarks and recipes for cancer. And coming back to your first question is, why are we seeing an increase in young people? I think all of the above. The toxins, the history, the red dye, the PFAS, the COVID, all of the above.
We were told, of course, you take the virus and then you can't get COVID or transmit it, but neither one turned out to be true. Demonstrably untrue. I mean,
well, it's not only demonstrably untrue, it was knowingly untrue. That's what's bad about it.
It would seem like that's criminal, actually. I mean, if I tell you that, this car gets 40 miles to the gallon and instead it blows up, that's a crime. You can't sell anything under false pretenses. That's a crime. I don't see how this is not a crime, but.
Well, as you said over breakfast, it's not a conspiracy if it's true.
Huh. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't even really know what to say. I mean, I wanted to do this interview, and mostly I just wanted to sit here and look frustrated, because I am.
Well, you asked earlier who benefits, right? And so consider the amount of deception that we've not only all witnessed, but has been basically reiterated by his comments there that it wasn't, they knowingly deceived people regarding transmission and, it's those things, right? But they also knowingly deceived people regarding the fact that it was supposed to break down quickly in the body. It's not messenger RNA, it's modified RNA. It's I believe the term pseudouridine modified RNA, which makes it hold up in the body, which is why it lasts so long. Okay. So we were told, and I actually had a friend at a major university's he runs a lab at a major university, great guy, good friend of mine. And he was explaining the vaccine before it all rolled out to my wife. And he said, look, this mRNA, it disappears in your system very quickly, couple of days, maybe 2 weeks. Well, he didn't know that this was modified specifically not to do that. And remember when we did that interview and we were talking, and we were asking the person we were interviewing at the time about the shots in the arm. And I said, what was it about the technology that would make them think it wouldn't stay in the arm? Like, is there something we don't understand? Because I thought that technology was designed to stay in the arm. This is back when we were a little more naive, right? And it turns out the reason it doesn't stay in the arm was that technology was specifically designed to go throughout the body. And they even talked among themselves at the FDA and CDC, which we now have on videotape, that was what it was supposed to do. At the same time, they were lying to the public. So I think there's an important value that I think people need to start to embrace. And that is, we have this one value, which is innocent until proven guilty. And that's fine for courts of law, but it doesn't work in politics. And we've now found that it does not work in medicine and science either. So I really think that if you've got an outcome that's occurring, the first thing to assume is that it was intended, right? And why would Pfizer and these other companies, or Moderna, I don't want to slander anybody who's not shifting that, but I think it's one of those big vaccine manufacturers is now switching its focus to cancer treatment, right? And we really have to ask the question, if this was the outcome and people like Sukarit Bhakdi knew it would be the outcome well before any of this was actually observed, simply based on the physiology of how this thing works, then how could it not also be intended? And so I think we have to take a stance of assumption of intent until proven otherwise.
Yeah, I don't.
Yeah, because look at the shot. We say, well, how come this is circulating throughout the body? Why is it? Well, it was intended to, right? How come it's not breaking down quick? Well, because it was intended to. So how come it's causing cancer? May that also have been intended?
And this opens the door to a critical review of history. You go back to the 90s. There was the Egyptian UN meeting where they discussed population control. And then you start looking at like fentanyl rolled out shortly after. Like all these negative things started really happening. And you could start asking questions. Okay, you remember when Tedros got very upset and said it was racist to consider doing vaccine clinical trials for COVID vaccines in Africa? Mm-hmm. He said this kind of racism would not help. And so that was a very curious statement from them and how passionate he was about it. It's hard not to look at this through the lens of a betrayal of humanity. Mm-hmm. And it's worse than profit. I mean, they say follow the money. We've definitely followed the money, and certainly there was a lot of profits to be made from this, but it's almost as if the greed motive for profit was secondary, or maybe even expected and exploited to get people on board this gravy train, which was self-destructive.
Yeah, I was one of the last people, I think, to come on board. I mean, obviously, there's not many who still haven't, but in terms of people who have been kind of out in front on this information, I was probably one of the last to come on board to say, maybe the real intent here was massive depopulation. But look at fertility, okay? Just take that alone. So you've got a situation here where within a year after the rollout of the vaccine to the demographic globally, reproductive demographic, so you're 20 and 30 years old, right? A 20% drop pretty much everywhere wherever the vaccine rolled out. In addition to that, a natal death, right? I recall Dr. Nagaste from Canada talking about the kind of increase in natal death. So this isn't miscarriages. These are viable fetuses that just die before they're delivered. That used to see, he said at his hospital, or at least in his ward, they would see 5 to 6 in a year. So that would be one at most every 2 months.
Yeah.
That switched to one every 2 days. That is an extraordinary, that's a 20, I think that's a 26, 2,800% increase in this. And so again, you've got to say the first thing that people were concerned about, the very first thing, and the thing that the Japanese were concerned about was this protein mimics a very important placental protein. If we immunize against that, will we be immunizing mothers against their own placentas? Fertility was the first thing that was caused. And I remember when my parents asked what I thought of it, and I was still a little bit naive, we thought, well, the benefits seem to outweigh the risks. In particular, you're not going to have any more kids, right? The only thing that I had heard at that time that I thought was credible was that it might affect fertility.
Yeah. You just wouldn't believe that educated medical leaders would do this.
Yeah.
You just couldn't imagine. Like when I see them now, there are doctors that are on Twitter and whatever else, and they still push the vaccine for pregnant mothers. I mean, it's beyond criminal. It's
what we're going to get into Francis Collins in a little bit, and his pushing the vaccine for pregnant mothers, I agree, I think was probably beyond criminal given the evidence he should have had at the time he was doing this.
So yeah, let's keep going. I mean, this next part definitely takes it to a darker level, but I think look, you've got a prominent UCLA medical doctor saying this stuff now. This is not in the realm of conspiracy theory, but look what they did to him. Look what was done to him. He was he was under consideration for the NIH in 2017. I think Peter Thiel had nominated him to the Trump committee that was coming in to the new administration as being the head of NIH. And Francis Collins panicked and sent out a request for help. But look who he was working with. This is gross.
But worse, I've since discovered, not by my inquiry, but it's been revealed to me, emails about Francis Collins and some politicians work hard to prevent me from even becoming head of NIH. And I think that was the motivation all the way downstream, that we asked, okay, so what happened to this vaccine? So I called the FDA and said, okay, I can't do a randomized placebo-controlled trial now because you got Pfizer's Moderna vaccines all over the place. So let me be the booster. And Peter Marks, to his credit, was the one who said, absolutely. Peter Marks, to his credit, was the one who says, I'm worried about this COVID vaccine and this long COVID. I want to study the effects of this vaccine. Peter Marks would then say to me, Patrick, fine, go ahead.
I just want to point out, too, the doctor had actually created his own, they use the term vaccine loosely for a T-cell boosting injection that would help you fight off the disease without an actual vaccine. Everyone should go watch this interview. It's about an hour and a half long, but it's really powerful. This is how they railroaded Dr. Soon-Shiong's different kind of vaccine that wasn't mRNA based and wasn't spike protein based.
Yeah. And so it wouldn't have had these negative effects, and it would have been a competing, safer alternative.
Yeah. And look, he could be biased. It's his own product. I don't know the details. Again, I'm not the scientist or the researcher. I'm just a guy saying, hey, look, he had an alternative, and this is how they treated his alternative, even when they, as Peter Marks told him, there was a concern.
I injected the first 3 patients as a booster. I get the call from the FDA to say, you have to stop. I said, why? To this day, they never explained to me it wasn't Peter. It was people around Peter said, you must stop. It was during the Biden era. And I think there was this, sadly, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but now I've come to realize it truly was a deep state inside there that had a motivation beyond, it's sad to say, it's the most devastating to say, beyond public health.
That's so powerful.
Mm-hmm.
That's so powerful. It was a motivation beyond public health. What in the hell was it?
Yeah, and that's why I say I think it's. I mean, it's hard for me to see that this was just financial. I mean, it could just been a financial incentive, and I would be more than happy than anyone else to come to be persuaded of that. But it does seem like we at least have to consider the possibility that maybe depopulation was the original intent.
Or depopulation, or and you look at the borders opened up today. It comes out. You've got interviews with illegal immigrants who were saying it took a week to get a social security number.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
This was what they were doing. Was this replacement theory thing? Is that what they're talking about? Is this it? Is that how it would look?
Yeah, well, Ed Dowd just had an interesting, it's too bad we don't have that clip, but he said, it is coincidental. In other words, we're all looking at coincidences here. I don't want to come off and say, I'm sure this was depopulation, but it's awfully coincidental. And Dowd, and I just saw a tweet from him in an interview he did, I believe, with Alex Jones. It was with Alex Jones, where he's saying, look, it's kind of odd that they give one portion of the population all of this vaccine, right? And he said, in his opinion, it really looks like they were trying to get rid of baby boomer pensioners, right, who are going to be an economic drag on the economy. And then you bring in all of these younger foreign nationals as part of replacement, and then you create an inflationary scenario. Like that, he's saying that we really need to consider that was the intent. So what we're talking about are some of the smartest people on the block now are coming to the conclusion that some pretty radical conspiracies have to be considered as potentially the most plausible solutions for all of the evidence we have. And that's the true use of Occam's razor, right? You want the simplest, sufficient explanation, but a simple explanation is not sufficient. You've got to go further to say what other complexities might be occurring.
Right. I mean, this is human nature. This is politics. There's so many different forces and organizations with their own agendas, all pulling and pushing and trying to sway public opinion. And let's keep going.
And I just tweeted recently of how so few people could hurt so many. And that's why when I tweeted about finally we have the right person in HHS with Bobby Kennedy who will take this on, and that we have doctors that will be like Marty McCary, who I don't know, but I do know he's a surgeon who can understand and touch and feel what it means to be there on behalf of the patient. And my support for that, I think we have a chance now to completely turn this around. I think the main culprit really sitting there was Francis Collins. And he controlled, I had shared with President Trump that Francis Collins should not be the NIH director. He offered me a job. Peter Thiel nominated me. And I've since found emails of Francis Collins sending an email to a politician that alarm bells, Peter Thiel has nominated Patrick Soon-Shiong. We have to find a way to stop it.
Why?
To this day, power, greed, political need. So I can't give motivation to that. All I can tell you is when I saw that email, I was devastated that somebody would actually go to that extent and then send that same email to the CEO of Bio, which is all big pharma. And that CEO of Bio said, let's go to Google search to find some dirt on him.
Dirt on you?
On me. To stop me from being nominated to be head of NIH or whatever.
Let's Google him to stop him?
Let's Google to find some dirt, some bad stuff, negative research, whatever they want to find. They probably couldn't find any dirt on me, but That was the interchange between them on email. And the only chance we have now, because I had no idea that the political deep state was so powerful and so vicious and so egotistical that they would stop good science. So now I'm out there speaking because the drug got approved. But that's not enough just for bladder cancer. It has the same treatment effect for pancreatic cancer, lung cancer, triple-negative breast cancer. It is the only molecule for 50 years that upregulates these killer cells, period, the missing link.
So, yeah, that...
I mean, I thought that was really interesting that he had said he had warned President Trump that Collins should not be the NIH director. And consider the body of lies and the consistent behavior of Francis Collins. Right, we know that he colluded with Fauci to suppress the doctors involved in the Barrington Declaration that was promoting ivermectin. That had discovered ivermectin would have put an end to this pandemic. He was, I believe, he was involved in the emails to suppress the idea that this came from the Wuhan lab, right? We know that he was involved with Fauci with the lie that Children's Health Defense uncovered by that any of the vaccines on the children's vaccine schedule were tested against an inert placebo. I mean, it's one thing after another. He even lied when he said that he wasn't going to fire Fauci because he wasn't going to fire the best, the greatest infectious disease doctor in history, right? I mean, he has to know that Fauci was not the greatest infectious disease doctor in history, so the amount of lies. And I think one of the most damaging was something that Dr. James Thorpe, a renowned obstetrician, his wife's a attorney, and they did a lot of FOIA requests and uncovered a lot of the funding going on. And I would be interested to know how much of this funding was Collins involved with, because what they did was they funded something like 42,000 hospitals, received millions of dollars to promote the vaccine narrative, with the rider on receiving that money that if they came out against what the HHS was putting out, they would have to return the money. And this was one of the reasons hospital doctors were so strongly suppressed, and why Dr. James Thorpe himself ended up getting fired. I believe his hospital had received over 300 million. That's Sisters of St. Mary's in St. Louis. And so there was bribery at all levels. He's got another article. This is at America Out Loud. If you go to America Out Loud and you search the Thorpe's webpage, there's another fantastic article there about how they basically bought off the obstetrician, the American, gynecological and obstetricians. 60,000 doctors were now being instructed by their national associations to push the vaccine on pregnant women. This was when we already knew that it hadn't even been safety tested for pregnancy, right? And I think one of the most nefarious ones is Collins then used at the same time he was using his status as a Christian. He's well known for being a Christian. I'm a Christian myself, so I'm very offended by this. But and they had this Faiths for Vaccines group, and they did a summit on May of 26. And Thorpe writes about this also. On May of 26, you've got Francis Collins assuring people that this is safe for pregnant women. Pregnant women should be taking it, and that the idea that there were adverse reactions from the vaccine were just conspiracy theories. May 26th of 2021. Now, you know what happened on February 28th of 2021? That was when Pfizer completed its study, and we had found that by then already 1,236 people had died. And you know what happened on April 30th of 2021? That was when it went to the FDA. It's time-stamped as being delivered to the FDA on April 30th. That means that it was within the hands of the institution which would be informing Francis Collins a month before this summit of faith leaders, where they're telling people, you do what Jesus would do. If you love your neighbor, get the vaccine. Oh, and it's safe for pregnant women. And this is just conspiracy theories. Like a month before that, they already had the data that it was horrible for pregnant women. So there's levels of, when he says that the deep state was more malevolent than he could have ever imagined, again, the smartest people on the block are picking up on this.
So, Seth Gruber discusses in a story called, what was the name of the story? The Most Evil Man in Medicine, something like that. Anyway, it's truly, I mean, this one interview.
As you know, the president in the White House.
When I watched Collins, and this was from July 2020, Collins smiling, folksy. Oh, the reason why everybody's sick is because we have freedom. I mean, look, gleeful.
Yeah.
If you were presiding over the most devastating public health disaster in American history, would you be all smiling? Well, gee whiz, holding up toys and crap like that and singing songs. He kept singing songs. That was his whole thing, too. Really, honestly, it's got all the makings of a Dr. Evil spinoff. It's terrifying. But I wanted to get to one point. Dr. Soon-Shiong says that there's a politician involved in the back and forth, and as soon as he said that, I thought, well, who would that be? And you got to think, this was 2017. This was before COVID. This was before we understood the horrific treatment of animals and babies and aborted children and things like that we've just come to discover the NIH under Collins was doing. Even so, Collins was in his email chain was with, I found the emails, by the way, through a FOIA, the FOIA request that Dr. Soon-Shiong is referring to. The emails involved James Greenwood, former congressman from Bucks County, Pennsylvania. He is the CEO of Bio for a decade or so. And I think he left in 2020 or 2022. It's not entirely sure, but I do know that in August of 2020, he came out in support of Joseph Biden. At that point, he may have left Bio, but do you ever really leave an organization like that? Bio represents Pfizer, Gilead, all the major pharmaceutical companies. So we had a very anti-Trump, I don't know, rhino, if you want to call him that, James Greenwood. But the other person that was on the thread was Newt Gingrich. Mm-hmm. Newt Gingrich was the one that said, I need details. Can your guys quietly go through Google, etc., and see if there are facts I can use to stop him in terms of hiring Patrick Soon-Shiong? And there are more, loud alarm bells are going off again. He's back on the list from Francis Collins. He was asking for help. So it appears that at the time, Newt Gingrich had the ear of the President Trump, or at least his advisor, as an advisory role to his committees that were making decisions. We don't know if Newt actually got through to the president or his people to influence their decision to stay with Francis Collins over Peter Thiel. But it's not a good look to be on an email thread keeping a bureaucrat who did horrible things just 2 or 3 years later. I mean, look, Francis Collins is essentially being insubordinate in the CNN interview where he had been quoted as saying that he would not fire Fauci if asked by the president. Yeah. The NIH director is a political appointee by the president. You do what your president says. So frankly, just to go out there and be insubordinate like that, that's very curious. How did he not get fired right then? Did they just refuse to quit?
Well, I think Francis Collins had such a stature among such a broad network of people, all the way from the sciences, university scientists, and as we saw, all the way to the churches. I think if this had been 10 years before and somebody said to me, well, would you trust Francis Collins' pick or would you trust Peter Thiel's? I would have said, well, I'm gonna side with Collins, right? And I think it's just what's turned out recently that's made him such a wolf in sheep's clothing. And it may be that perhaps Newt Gingrich. I've always liked Gingrich. I don't trust anyone now, right? So I do think he needs to distance himself from this formally. But I leave open the possibility that
he thought he was doing the right
might have been like myself a number of years ago and thought, well, if Collins is behind this, I should do what I can to help.
Yeah, it's it's just very now that we know who Francis Collins is, it's less pleasant. But I will say that I did reach out to former Speaker Gingrich for context, and I asked him if he'd do an interview, and he just said no. So, it doesn't look good no matter how you look at it. But he has also been, I believe, in Washington D.C. this week, discussing, judicial issues and corruption within the judiciary. I believe. Don't quote me on that.
Yeah, and he did some. I'm very appreciative for what he had to say.
It's just disappointing. I don't necessarily want anybody to throw their friends under the bus because things look bad. But this is worse than they look bad. Francis Collins appears to have been a big component in a huge national,
this is a
global disaster.
Yeah. Coming out of this, it's a warning to everyone, right? Doctors cannot just trust the CDC and the NIH without thinking independently. They're gone are the days where you're just okay if you're doing the best practices, right? Even if those days return, right? It's going to be trust but confirm, not just trust. Right. And politicians, the same thing. Everybody's going to have to, I think, look and see, well, what part did we play in this? I've got friends or former friends. It's like, oh, how many people did you treat with remdesivir? And what percentage of those patients did you kill?
Right. And we should point out, too, that Bio under James Greenwood, now maybe he had left when this happened, or I don't know necessarily the details, but Bio paid public good projects, according to Li Feng, according to actual Form 990s, I believe, Bio paid pharmaceutical groups Bio paid public good projects to do something. And what did public good projects do? They created Shots Heard, or they took over Shots Heard, which was a sort of private flash mob group that would attack doctors if they said things on social media that went against the narrative. Yeah. And how would they attack doctors? Well, as we covered in our Shotsgate stories, they would file medical license complaints against doctors like Mary Talley Bowden, who we interviewed Dr. Bowden a few years ago and showed her, we had been given internal documentation and posts from these Facebook groups where they were bragging about getting, medical license boards to take on doctors that spoke out. This is just horrible. It's really just unbelievable. The effort that was put to suppress this information. It's not science. It's something else. Yeah. It's politics.
Well, you talked about his folksy manner.
Yeah.
And let me read a quote here from that summit that I mentioned. Here's Collins speaking. Yeah, there's lots of concerns out there about possible side effects. We've not seen those conspiracy theories turning out to be true. We certainly have no evidence that this causes infertility. You probably heard that one. There's actually no evidence that this is any way harmful to pregnant women. In fact, probably beneficial because they have a high risk of serious illness from COVID-19. They're still collecting that data. Okay, this is the month after that data had been delivered to the FDA. We had 1,200 deaths, over 1,200 deaths. And we knew that the most at-risk group for getting this vaccine had to have been pregnant women and their fetuses. But you see how that folksy manner that you referred to earlier, you've heard these conspiracy theories, he just throws it in. He's not even saying, hey, those are conspiracy theories. He just throws it in. I think it's very polished to deceive, or to maybe he's just, a doddering tool and doesn't know at this point, and he's a month behind his institution's own data. But as James Thorpe said, I said, could Collins have not have known? And Thorpe said to me, well, if I knew, he knew, right? He's the head.
Right.
So,
well, and also you can see, like,
yeah,
they were doing takedowns, the NIH and NIAID and Fauci and all their gang. They had people in the FOIA department that taught them how to get around FOIA requests. Maybe it was misspelling things or using Google accounts versus using their actual official emails. There were tips and tricks that they had that they shared to communicate without trace. And what were they saying there?
And I think that this is theater.
Google's a crime scene, apparently. Gmail.
Yeah, and I think this was theater right down to the last, oh shucks, y'all, right? In fact, that might be something we could see Collins and Fauci having something in common with. I mean, Fauci was such a smooth liar. He was so bad, I would bring my kids out to the TV to watch Fauci, and I'd say, kids, doesn't he look like a nice grandpa or a great uncle? And he's well dressed and he's sharp and he's smooth and he seems so concerned. And then I point out everything this guy's saying is a lie. And so this was polished delivery designed to deceive.
It's horrible. And you know what the sad thing is? The people that believed them the most, that trusted the science, they're the ones that got the majority of the shots. They're the ones who are now, they are going to bear the full burden of the risk from, 8-9 boosters at this point.
Well, right. Remember our interview with Maddie DeGarry, right?
Yeah.
Or Stephanie DeGarry about her daughter, Maddie. I mean, those kids ran out to try to help society by being part of the trial, not knowing that the CDC and FDA had already communicated amongst themselves about virtually all of the adverse events. It turns out there'd be more that they hadn't predicted, but the ones that Maddie experienced at the very same time it was being denied among her doctors,
right?
Among the people running the trial, and the CDC had already discussed this stuff 3 months earlier. I mean, it's unbelievable.
Well, I think it's ultimately very disappointing. I think I would hope that former Speaker Gingrich, I hope he regrets in being involved in this at all, because what it looks like is he was working with a guy who was insubordinate to the president of the United States and may have betrayed his own country. I mean, the ramifications of all of it it's so profound. It's it boggles the mind. It's why we made Epidemic of Fraud, right? We had to expose the ridiculousness of what these people had done. And I thought maybe at first it was because they really believed in this new mRNA platform, and they thought it was going to really do great things, and they just had to push through, the resistance. I mean, in California, they say they have NIMBYs, right? Not in my backyard, so you can't get any development done because all the old people that own property here block it. So they thought, well, we could just push through it, but I don't know. This, at some point, when do you stop?
Wouldn't you expected? This is why to say it is, I think, designed to deceive rather than designed just to persuade. Okay. Wouldn't you expect? And wouldn't all of those pastors at that conference and all the people watching him on TV assume that if there was data rolling in about the dangers of this vaccine, that the head of the NIH, National Institute for Health, it's not National Institutes for Gain of Function or National Institutes of Disease Spreading, National Institutes of Health, wouldn't they be the first ones out there saying, hey, we're seeing some alarming things, but the data is still being collected? They're saying the opposite. They're saying, hey, all of these conspiracy theories you've been hearing, there's no evidence for that. The data is still being collected, but there's no evidence. But we all knew there was evidence by then.
FDA fired people that said that there was a risk. Remember?
Right. Peter McCullough talked about how by then the uptake was starting to decline by later spring of, because this is May, and then in July they do another push because the uptake is declining because there's enough people who just know people who drop dead. Right.
They made so many bad decisions at every level. At some point, you have to start asking, is this intentional?
Yeah.
And that goes down to how they discredited hydroxychloroquine, how they promoted remdesivir, and the real, I don't know if it's brilliantly evil, is that if you know the people on the left will do the opposite of what Donald Trump says, he said try hydroxychloroquine. The only time that doesn't apply though is the vaccine. He promoted the vaccine too. Mm-hmm. So it's weird how that doesn't turn them off.
I mean, I think he genuinely believed it. I mean, I don't think Trump's going to come out and openly say that he was deceived. Right. But I think that's exactly what it was. But I think too, we've got to remember from all the work that we've done over the last couple of years, right? It wasn't hydroxychloroquine. It was suppressed because they knew it could be effective. Right. It was for that very reason that it was suppressed. And if there's any doubt about hydroxychloroquine, then there can be absolutely no doubt about ivermectin. Right. Now, there's no doubt about hydroxychloroquine, but the proof is that the narrative against ivermectin was so detached from reality or for science that it was absolutely because they knew ivermectin worked that they were suppressing that one too. So basically everything that they knew worked, they suppressed up into and including monoclonal antibodies, which was an expensive therapy, right? So people say, well, if it was really about money, why suppress an expensive therapy like monoclonal antibodies? But they suppressed that too. Anything that worked, they suppressed.
Right. It's a mess, Clinton. Everybody, you should go check out the full interview on Tucker Carlson Network. I think he's posted it on X as well.
And can I add something?
Sure.
Everybody ought to be checking out Dr. William Mackus, the Canadian oncologist, his Twitter feed on the therapies that they're finding for cancer. Because if his studies that he's posting are right, I mean, that's going to be the way out of this. I'm very concerned for this generation coming up who were basically forced to get these vaccines in order to stay in college and get their college degrees. From the looks of it, they will be the most cancer-affected generation in American history and in human history. Okay, maybe outside of Chernobyl. Okay.
And what happens to their kids, though? That's even more concerning.
Well, if there are therapies, if ivermectin and febendazole and now bendazole and methylene blue are doing what it appears that they're doing, everybody needs to know about it. Everybody needs to be on top of it, and everybody needs to be using it.
Yeah, I'm not a doctor. These are all just opinions. Don't take our word for it. Blah blah blah.
Yeah, we're not giving medical advice. We're just saying this is the direction that the science appears to be going. So everybody needs to be aware.
So let's hope that. I think we may refile our NIH gate request now that we have new leadership. Let's see what happens with that. Clinton Ohlers, thank you very much. This is Broken Truth. I'm John Davidson. Have a good day.
Thanks, John.